President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris continue to face mounting challenges tonight, with President Trump refusing to concede and blocking them from both transition funds and high-level intelligence briefings. Now, while some Republicans are expressing unease, most of them are standing by as the president makes baseless claims of election fraud. And on Friday afternoon, President Trump touted vaccine developments, but he did not concede and vaguely referenced, quote, whatever administration comes next.
This administration will not be going to a lockdown. Hopefully the whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be. I guess time will tell. But I can tell you this administration will not go to a lockdown.
As Americans wait for the FDA to make a final decision, the pandemic keeps spreading at an alarming rate, with more than 160,000 new cases on Thursday alone. Hospitals are at a breaking point, with Thanksgiving just weeks away. Joining me tonight to discuss these stories are three trusted reporters. Evan Osnos, staff writer for The New Yorker and author of Joe Biden, The Life, The Run, and What Matters Now. Ashley Parker, White House reporter for The Washington Post. And Rachel Scott, White House correspondent for ABC News, who joins us from Delaware. Let's first turn to Biden and Harris. They are taking calls from world leaders, and this week named Ron Klain as the incoming White House chief of staff. Rachel, what's next up there in Delaware? What's the plan for dealing with this defiant president?
Yeah, well, we know the Biden's team is having those critical conversations about who will fill his cabinet, who will be part of his administration. But the reality is that as they are preparing these teams, their own coronavirus task force team, as they're putting together these agency review teams, they can only get so far. At some point, they are going to need some cooperation from the current administration. They do not have access to their counterparts at these federal agencies and departments. They do not have access to these briefs. And that is something that we're even hearing a growing number of Republicans now come out and say that Vice President Joe Biden, now the president-elect, deserves to have national security briefings and get that intelligence at this point. And even the President Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, saying tonight that this is about the country. This is not partisan. This is not a partisan game. President Trump doesn't have to necessarily concede for Joe Biden to get that information.
Evan, your Biden book subtitle includes the phrase, "What matters now?" So, what matters now?
Well, as Rachel was saying, we are at a crucial moment for this country, not just on the domestic side, but also on national security and foreign affairs. If you go back and you look at the bipartisan 9/11 Commission, one of the recommendations in there was to actually accelerate the process of getting national security aides approved with their background checks, getting them access to crucial intelligence, because it's in this period when the United States is acutely vulnerable. And instead, what we're seeing is a White House, an outgoing White House, that is taking steps to delay the process, to extend this fragile handover. And I think what matters now from the president-elect's perspective is to convey, and this is important, a sense of inevitability. I mean, let's be clear about what's going on. There is not an actual dispute over the votes. There is not an actual dispute over the law. There is a state of political, call it what it is, confusion in the mind of the outgoing president. And the president-elect is going to maintain the clear sense that he's not deterred by it.
Ashley, Rachel mentioned that former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly did tell Politico on Friday that, quote, you lose a lot in the transition if things are delayed, and it threatens national security, as Evan just mentioned. Do President Trump's close advisors recognize the risk, and are they communicating that message to him?
Well, that is sort of the rub. When you talk to not just the president's advisors, but even Republicans on Capitol Hill who should know better, and in fact, in many cases, privately do know better, their attitude is sort of, as one put it to me, what is the harm in humoring the president to help him get to sort of that emotional space where even if he doesn't officially concede and even if he's not gracious, as we have come to historically expect, he gets to a place where he can leave office. And what is unsaid there, and the harm, is exactly that. It is the transition of power, both in terms of the current president is eroding trust in this election, in democratic norms generally, and of course the national security implications. As Evan mentioned, this sort of more robust transition came out of the wake of 9/11, and we can't predict a sort of worst case scenario, what terrorist attack we can't conceive yet. But one thing we can conceive of right now is the coronavirus. That is a tremendous national security threat. And one of the things we know is going to be a challenge at the very least is this handoff from Donald Trump, who has not really been managing this virus at all. He hasn't attended a task force meeting in months, we've been told, to Joe Biden in managing that vaccine distribution. And that is one thing, a national security issue, a public health issue that is very much falling by the wayside. And in my reporting, this is not one of the key things that Trump world allies are raising to the president.
Rachel, bouncing off of that point by Ashley, what is the Biden-Harris plan on the virus? Are they talking about the need for another lockdown, as the president suggested earlier today?
No, actually, they're not. And it was interesting hearing the president put so much emphasis on there not being a national lockdown. And we had Vivek Murthy on our programming on Good Morning America, who said he does not feel like there is a need for a national lockdown at this point. But what he did emphasize was testing. He says that that is one area where he feels like the United States and this current administration have lacked, and that they would like to make up the gaps there in getting rapid and quick testing to communities that really need it, communities that are disproportionately affected. It was also interesting hearing the president talk about the rollout of a vaccine. He said that would come likely by April. At that point, Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, but right now they don't have access to a vaccine distribution plan because of this holdup with the transition. President Trump blocking this transition process and blocking that critical information from the next president of the United States.
Evan, you've written extensively on China, won a National Book Award, and China has congratulated President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. What's the import of that and other world leaders moving on, even when the president does not?
You know, we saw this really interesting process play out over the course of the week where in foreign capitals around the world, you could practically hear the analysts sort of looking at one another and saying, what do we do now? We've never had a situation in which an American president has not dignified the result of a legitimate election. It took them a while, but you gradually began to see first American allies announcing their congratulations. And then finally, a lot of us were waiting for this, we heard the Chinese government come forward and say that they acknowledge and congratulate Joe Biden on his win. Interestingly, though, Bob, you know, you did not hear Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, personally congratulate Biden yet. That's one other shoe to drop that hasn't yet happened. But I think this also gives you a sense of how discombobulating this is for global affairs, to have an American presidency in its final weeks here behaving in a way that's so unrecognizable. From the Chinese perspective, to be perfectly blunt, you know, they have actually benefited in a lot of ways from the disorder at the top of the Trump presidency. If you look at global polls, you find that for the first time in a Pew survey recently, that Donald Trump, the American president, had lower favorability than President Xi Jinping of China or Vladimir Putin of Russia. So in a way, China is a little sorry to see Trump leave the stage. It's been, for them, as they put it in Chinese, a period of strategic opportunity, and that window is now closing.